In eastern China, a tornado lashes the region, leaving 10 dead.
Authorities say more than 5,000 people were affected by the twister. More details on this later in the news. Good evening, I am Gianna Llanes.
I am Nina Richielago Flores. This is Matang Agila International. Now for the headlines. Marcos administration seeks for multi-billion pesos worth of digitalization fund by 2024. Philippines supports the move to interpret UNCLOS in the context of climate protection. Azerbaijan launches an attack against Armenia in Nagorno-Karabakh. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky delivers his address at the United Nations General Assembly. And the UEFA Champions League opens in full force. The Marcos administration is seeking 38.75 billion pesos for the digitalization of government processes in 2024. Budget Secretary Amena Pangandaman highlights the importance of technological advancement in improving the efficiency of the bureaucracy, which in turn benefits the Filipino people. She adds that the proposed budget will be divided across 10 different agencies, namely the Departments of Education, Justice, Finance, and National Defense, among others. A separate 2.5 billion pesos will also fund the free Wi-Fi connectivity in public places and state universities program, targeting 50 broadband sites in 82 provinces.
The Asian Development Bank has revised its 2023 economic growth forecast for the Philippines, lowering it from 6 to 5.7%. ADB Philippines Country Director Pavit Ramachandran asserts that growth in the country remains strong despite the projected slowdown this year. He highlights that the economy will be supported by public investment and private spending, a sustained increase in remittances from OFWs, and a thriving services sector. The bank also underscores that the projected slowdown can be attributed to geopolitical tensions, recessions in advanced economies, and the potential impact of severe weather disturbances, such as the looming El Niño phenomenon.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. stressed his government's no-mercy stance on corruption and human rights violations at the Philippine National Police or PNP Star Rank Officers Oath-taking ceremony. He cautioned cops to behave or face the government's wrath if they sully the PNP's image. The president said that there was no room for leniency for those who tarnish the PNP's reputation and endanger the people's safety. Government data shows that more than 2,500 cops have faced suspension or dismissal from the National Police for breaking its rules and laws since January of 2023. The president expects the police force to always uphold the highest ideals and values in keeping the people safe from harm. He also encouraged them to be the driving force of the change that the country seeks. The chief executive reaffirmed his full support of the National Police's initiatives. During the ceremony, 57 PNP officials were promoted, including 4 lieutenant generals, 10 major generals, and 43 brigadier generals.
The Department of Health has issued a health reminder to the public on what to do during an ashfall caused by a volcanic eruption. Vin Pasqua for the details.
The Department of Health, or DOH, reminds the public of precautionary measures to protect themselves from the impact of an ashfall spewed by volcanic activity. This comes as Mayon volcano persists to show its erratic behavior. According to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, or PHIVOLCS, Mayon remains on alert level 3, indicating a relatively high level of unrest. The health department advises the public to stay inside their homes and avoid going outside if possible during an ashfall. It adds that affected individuals are advised to prepare emergency bags with sufficient food, water, clothes, first aid, and medicine. DOH further reminds to wear face masks to protect oneself from inhaling ash. Wearing of safety goggle is also recommended to secure eye care. The agency also instructs the public to wash their hands thoroughly before eating or cooking. Vin Pascua reporting for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
The Marcos administration is seeking to impose a fishing ban in breeding areas to ensure food security. This comes as the president laments that Filipino fisher folk face difficulties in fishing yield due to the destruction of breeding areas. The president knows that 30% of the fishing yield of the fisher folk have either been degraded or damaged. This made the government implement programs to put up more cold storage facilities to prevent spoilage. He notes that imposing several restrictions are part of the government's plan to secure the country's fish supply is sufficient.
The Philippines has increased its monitoring capabilities in the West Philippine Sea through added aircraft handed by the United States government. The turnover of the U.S. aircraft came after China's alleged massive coral harvesting in the Rosal Reef and Escoda Shoal. The Armed Forces of the Philippines received the Cessna 208B aircraft as an addition to the Philippine Air Force's inventory of air assets. Meanwhile, AFP Chief Romeo Bronner Jr. notes that the plane will provide enhanced military capabilities in air maritime patrols in the West Philippine Sea.
The Philippine Coast Guard of PCG has initiated collaboration with local marine experts to investigate samples of damaged corals obtained from regions frequented by Chinese vessels in the West Philippine Sea. Video footage shows crushed and bleached corals at the Escoda Shoal. Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. says that it must first be validated whether the Chinese had been destroying the coral reefs for reclamation activities. Justice Secretary Jesus Crispin Remulla recommends filing complaints against China over harvesting and destroying the coral reefs, no matter the results of the investigation.
The Philippine government is supporting a statement delivered before a UN court to determine the specific duties of states in preventing the pollution of marine environments. Philippine Permanent Representative to the UN, Carlos Sorreta, highlights the vulnerability of the country as an archipelagic state during the proceedings. He proposes a change to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea to better suit the present circumstances, noting the coastal erosion, bleaching of coral reefs, and others that affect the natural resources in the country alone. The European Union and New Zealand also mentioned the 2016 arbitral ruling on the West Philippine Sea during the tribunal meeting. Coming up, Azerbaijan launches an offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh. Volodymyr Zelensky addresses the United Nations. And Hunter Biden pleads not guilty to gun charges. Stay tuned. Mata ng Agila International will return for more global news.
Kings, patuloy na rumeresponde ang Kings Empire Corporation sa paghatid ng pag-asa at tulong pangkabuhayan. Kaya naman ngayong buwan ng Agosto sa pagdiriwang ng ika-4 na anibersaryo ng Kings Empire Corporation, may hatid na mga sorpresa at papremyo sa pamamagitan ng 4 promo. Naglalakihang diskwento up to 50% discount ang iyong ma-e-enjoy. Start na ngayong August 7, 2023 hanggang January 26, 2024. At bilang regalo ng Kings Empire Corporation, para sa patuloy na pagtitiwala at pagtangkilik sa kumpanya, mamimili ng 10 individual na may tinataglay ng iba't ibang uri ng karamdaman. Rerespondehan sa pamamagitan ng King's Herbal Plus mula day 1 hanggang sa ikaw ay makaranas ng kaginhawaan. Tawag na at ikwenta sa amin ang iyong istoryang King's Herbal Plus. 045-404-3286 0908 0917-776-6666, 0933-350-4525, 0915-495-9724. Email responde@net25tv.
Welcome back to Mata ng Agila International. Senior Pentagon officials disclosed that a Chinese blockade on the Taiwan island would be a monster risk for Beijing. This is after tensions have begun to escalate in the region as China has ramped up its military pressures on Taiwan. Taiwan's defense ministry previously detected dozens of warplanes crossing in borders early this week. Meanwhile, Pentagon pointed out that the island's mountainous terrain and the Taiwan Strait waterway is nothing easy for China's invasion of Taiwan. Previously, United States Army Major General Joseph McGee voiced out the difficulty of conducting an actual blockade than to talk about it. This pertains to Beijing's large-scale war games simulating a blockade on Taiwan.
Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has expressed his willingness to openly meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This treads a diplomatic path amid soaring tensions over Pyongyang's weapons programs. Kishida made his pronouncement at the United Nations General Assembly. In a speech, Kishida vows to resolve all issues with North Korea, including Pyongyang's alleged past kidnappings of Japanese civilians to train its spies. The Japanese leader also gave his invitation to hold high-level bilateral talks with North Korea.
条件をつけずにいつでも金正恩委員長に直接向き合うとの決意を伝え、首脳会談を早期に実現すべく、私直轄のハイレベルで協議を行っていきたいと思っています。
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has returned to Pyongyang, wrapping up his week-long Russia tour. Kim's visit to Russia's Far East included a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This has established fears for the Western countries over the chances that Pyongyang could provide Moscow with weapons for its war against Ukraine. During the trip, North Korea's leader observed Russia's assets from space rockets to submarines. State media said that North Korean senior officials and citizens greeted their supreme leader upon arrival at the train station.
United States President Joe Biden met with the leaders of the Central Asian countries in the C5+1 dialogue in New York. This marked the first edition of the presidential gathering as it occurred on the sidelines of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly. During the meeting, leaders from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan shared their commitment to cooperate on sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. The meeting aims to establish greater cooperation matters such as U.S. security financing for the region, as well as the fight against terrorism, energy security, and among others. The summit highlights Washington's growing interest in the participating Central Asian countries.
It's an honor to be here with you, our first presidential summit, all the presidents around this table, the Secretary of State. I think this is a historic moment, building on years of close cooperation between Central Asia and the United States. The cooperation is grounded in our shared commitment to sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity. These principles matter more than ever, in my view. And today, we're taking our cooperation to new heights.
The Azerbaijan Defense Ministry has initiated what it terms as anti-terrorist measures in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. This action comes as a response to Armenia's shelling of Azerbaijan's army in the past few months. RT's Yasin Ekin has the details.
Armenia calls the most recent developments aggression on behalf of the Azerbaijani side, who suggests that they are carrying out an operation in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. One of the fundamental reasons as to why the Azerbaijani side would be interested in such an approach could potentially be the same thing that it has been vocal about for the past 3 months. Azerbaijan says that the Armenian side has been violating a number of agreements that have been crucial and critical in achieving a peace deal or a cessation of hostilities since 2020, the second Nagorno-Karabakh war, which resulted in a victory for the Azerbaijani side. So looking at where we stand right now, there's a great deal of shelling and precision strikes against targets within that area, an area which Azerbaijan suggests Armenia has deployed either troops, offshoots of certain groups within the region that have carried out a number of operations that have also deteriorated the agreement that was in place that ensured a roadmap for peace and stability. So much so that Russia immediately came out and called the two sides to get together, put down the arms, and essentially agreed to abide by the rules and the agreements that were laid down in the first place. Now, it's easier said than done. Many analysts on the Azerbaijani side suggest that this is just precision strikes and that the targets have been determined, or at least predetermined, and that this won't take no longer than a few days. There's also the possibility that this could further escalate. It's very crucial to see how Russia, particularly speaking, is going to handle the situation. We do know that Russia currently has a peacekeeping force of roughly 2,000 soldiers within the region, and that it could be a determining factor to ensure that the two sides come back to the negotiating table and discuss the prospects for peace moving forward.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is claiming that Russia is weaponizing everything from food to energy in the Ukraine war, fear-mongering during the UN General Assembly's annual top-level meeting. Ray Marksanaba tells us more.
And it is a clear Russia's attempt to weaponize the food shortage on the global market in exchange for recognition for some, if not all, of the captured territories.
The conflict in Ukraine has significantly disrupted global supply chains, exacerbating the already challenging after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is largely due to sanctions against Russia, a significant provider of energy to Europe and a key source of grain through the Black Sea. President Zelensky is also demanding an explanation from the UN regarding Russia's position on its Security Council. This isn't the first instance of him pointing out the international body's perceived shortcomings, previously calling the UN as a retired superhero that has forgotten its former greatness. Russian Deputy UN Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky will be addressing the General Assembly on the 23rd of September. Ray Marksanaba for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
A top United Nations official urges authorities in the Dominican Republic to reopen its borders with Haiti. The official suggests using diplomacy to resolve the dispute over a shared river. Carlo Valdez reports.
The Dominican Republic announced the border closure on Thursday. The shutdown was in response to Haiti's plans to build the canal on the Massacre River. The Dominican Republic argues it violates several border treaties between the two nations which share the island of Hispaniola. UN's top official on human rights in Haiti, William O'Neill, says the border must be reopened. O'Neill urges the government to reconsider its decision, which he says will have serious impacts on people on both sides of the border. He adds that many businesses in the Dominican Republic depend on trade with Haiti and rely on Haitian workers. O'Neill says the consequences of the border closure will be even more dire for Haiti. Haiti imports much of its food and medical supplies from the Dominican Republic. O'Neill says directors of medical clinics in Haiti fear that they will not be able to care for their patients if access to the Dominican Republic is cut off. Dominican President Luis Abinader reiterated Sunday that land, air, and sea borders with Haiti will remain closed until the canal project is halted. Carlo Valdez for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
President Ibrahim Raisi demands an end to U.S. sanctions against Iran. This after a halt in talks on restoring a nuclear deal. Bernadette Regini has more.
In New York, addressing the United Nations General Assembly, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi says U.S. sanctions on Iran have not yielded the desired results. Raisi says it's time for the U.S. to bring a cessation to what he labels as its wrong path and choose the right side. He says Iran does not consider the war in Europe to be in the interest of any European side. The leader of the clerical state says the rejection of any ceasefire plan in the Ukraine war by the Americans show that America has a long-term plan to weaken Europe. Meanwhile, Iranian Americans gather outside the United Nations to protest against Raisi's presence at the General Assembly. Protesters say it is a humiliation for Iranian people. Deputy Director of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Alireza Jafarzadeh, says several thousand Iranian Americans have come from 40 states to tell the world that Raisi does not belong to the UN and should be tried for crimes against humanity.
They should be expelled from the United Nations because this body is for commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When you are involved in genocide, you cannot be a member state of the United Nations. When you're developing nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction, you cannot be a member of the United Nations. If you are the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, how can you be a member of the United Nations?
Bernadette Regini for Matanang Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa denounces the billions of dollars spent on war instead of development. This as he renewed his call for diplomacy in Ukraine. Addressing the United Nations General Assembly, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa says it was time to massively scale up aid on development. This, he says, as the world falls short on ambitious UN-backed goals to end extreme poverty by 2030.
It is a grave indictment on this international community that we can spend so much money on war. And in fact, trillions are being spent on war, but we cannot support action that needs to be taken to meet the basic needs of billions of people in the world. Needs such as addressing hunger, health, empowering women, and making sure that there is development in countries that are vulnerable.
Ramaphosa says he spoke at the summit in New York to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky about a peace initiative by African nations. South Africa, along with other developing nations, considers itself neutral in the Ukraine war. It has refused to isolate Moscow, recalling the former Soviet Union's support for ending apartheid. But the U.S. ambassador in South Africa has aired allegations that the country allowed arms shipments to Russia. This is a claim denied by Ramaphosa after an investigation. In his speech, Ramaphosa stresses South Africa's democratic credentials. He urges diplomacy after a string of military takeovers on the continent, including Niger.
Interior Minister Gerald Dongmanon says France refuses to welcome any migrants coming from Italy's Lampedusa. This after the Mediterranean island saw record numbers of arrivals. Rex Dulay has more.
The United Nations International Organization for Migration says some 8,500 people arrived on Lampedusa on 199 boats between Monday and Wednesday last week. This surge of migrants prompted European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to travel there Sunday. Von der Leyen announced an emergency action plan. Darmanin says Paris told Italy it was ready to help them return people to countries with which they have good diplomatic relations. These include the Ivory Coast and Senegal. Darmanin says, however, that France will not welcome migrants from the island. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has called on Italy's EU partners to share more of the responsibility. The recent arrivals on Lampedusa equal more than the whole population of the tiny Italian island. Rex Dulay, trusted, connected, on point.
President-elect Bernardo Arevalo of Guatemala asked the Supreme Court to fire Attorney General Consuelo Porras, accusing her of plotting to keep him from taking power after his surprise election win. Arevalo called for Porras' resignation after prosecutors seized ballots cast in a first round of election on June 25. The 64-year-old Social Democrat pulled off a massive upset to advance to the August 20 runoff, which he won. It is the latest episode in a tug-of-war between Arevalo and authorities who have repeatedly moved to act against a politician in his party after he unexpectedly won a presidential election last month. He has already filed a criminal complaint against anti-graft prosecutor Rafael Curuchichi and a colleague Cynthia Monteroso. In between the two rounds of voting, Curuchichi's office sought to suspend Arevalo's Semilla party, provoking international consternation over attempted election interference.
Pero hay quienes no entienden y no escuchan al pueblo. Consuelo Porras. Por ejemplo, Consuelo Porras. Necesidad de venir a plantear amparos contra estos funcionarios que han traicionado. En esta tarde, donde estamos presentando un amparo en defensa de la democracia. Gracias por estar aquí con su voluntad, con su energía, con su entusiasmo y con la determinación de no rendirse ante estos corruptos que no cesan en el intento de no soltar el poder. Gracias.
Georgian Dream Party has filed a petition with the Constitutional Court to launch impeachment proceedings against President Salome Zurabichvili for allegedly violating the country's constitution through unauthorized visits to the European Union this month. 80 members of parliament from the party signed the petition submitted to the Constitutional Court with a proposal to impeach Zurabichvili. The ruling party recently announced the initiation of impeachment proceedings against Zurabichvili when she embarked on a foreign tour on August 31 without obtaining government approval. The Georgian government said it had previously denied Zurabichvili in writing her planned trips to various countries from August to December. The president, meanwhile, said her trip is aimed at strengthening Georgia's position on the issue of becoming an EU candidate country.
The 5 Americans freed by Iran in a prisoner's swap are finally back in the U.S., this after being held for years in captivity. Rosel Ferry has a report.
A deep sigh of relief was taken by the freed Americans as they stepped off the airplane at Fort Belvoir's Davison Army Airfield just outside of Washington, D.C. For some, it was their first breath of U.S. air in 8 years. Applause, hugs, and kisses welcomed them. They, in turn, broke down in tears.
Almost 8 years to the day. It's unbelievable. We're so grateful. It's just, we feel like it's a dream. The nightmare is finally over.
After discussions led in part by Qatar, Iran, and U.S. completed the prisoner exchange. As part of the agreement, $6 billion in frozen funds were transferred to Iran. According to government officials, the funds are to be used by Iran for humanitarian purposes. The critics of U.S. President Joe Biden were quick to denounce the deal. Rosel Feria for Matanang Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
U.S. President Joe Biden's son, Hunter, will plead not guilty to charges of illegally buying a gun when he was using drugs. This, his lawyer announced yesterday. The 53-year-old was charged last week with 2 counts of making false statements in connection with a gun he purchased in 2018. The charges say he purchased the firearm at a time he was using drugs. It claims he did not declare his drug use at the time of purchase. Hunter Biden is facing a 3rd charge based on the same statements. If convicted on all 3 felony charges, he could face up to 25 years in prison. Jail time in this type of case, however, is rare. Hunter Biden's life has been marred by alcoholism and drug addiction. It has been a cause of trouble for President Biden's bid for
Up next, King Charles III set for a state visit to France. Thousands march for indigenous rights in Australia. And scientists alarmed by the Antarctic sea ice levels. Mata ng Agila International will be back with more global news. Please stay tuned.
This portion is brought to you by 318 by Robic Builders.
Britain's King Charles and Queen Camilla will finally arrive in France for a state visit, 6 months later than they originally planned. As a result of this, President Emmanuel Macron was forced to postpone his originally scheduled trip. The French leader halted the March visit with just days to go, saying at the time that his government would have lacked common sense if it had gone ahead. The British monarch and his wife instead traveled to Germany for their historic first foreign tour. The packed royal itinerary for the rescheduled 3-day visit to Paris and Bordeaux, ending Friday, is largely unchanged except for a few additions. One new engagement will see Charles and Camilla rubbing shoulders with top athletes at an event, highlighting the advantages of sports for young people. France is currently hosting the Men's Rugby World Cup, and next year's Olympics will be held in Paris. Another fresh element will be the launch of a new Franco-British literary prize by Camilla and the president's wife Brigitte Macron at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the National Library. But before all that, the royal couple will be welcomed to the French capital with a remembrance ceremony at the Arc de Triomphe. After laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier, the group will proceed down the Champs-Élysées to the Élysée Presidential Palace, where Charles and Macron will hold one-on-one talks. They will touch upon a range of subjects from biodiversity and climate change to the war in Ukraine and the situation in the Sahel.
British inflation has unexpectedly slowed in August, hitting an 18-month low. In a statement, the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, said that the Consumer Prices Index dropped slightly to 6.7% from 6.8% in July. That was the lowest since February of 2022 and confounded expectations for an acceleration to 7.1% on higher energy prices. Wednesday's news sent the pound sliding almost 0.4% to $1.2347 in morning deals, with the U.S. Federal Reserve set to hold rates. Despite the drop, British inflation remains the highest in the G7 group of rich nations, after peaking at a 41-year high of 11.1% in October last year. Elevated inflation has prompted almost 18 months of regular stoppages by public and private sector workers whose pay is failing to keep pace. The Bank of England has so far ramped up its key interest rates 14 times in a row to the current level of 5.25% in a bid to bring down inflation. The ONS added that food prices rose by less in August than a year earlier, where its impact was only partially offset by higher energy costs.
Colombia is considering legal action against the U.S. firm that provides web hosting services targeted in a recent cyber attack. The said attack has downed dozens of government websites. Kim Ioria has more.
Bogota accuses the firm IFX Networks of negligence in the attack that affected at least 32 key websites. These include the Justice, Health and Culture Ministries, several hospitals, and the Stock Market Authority. Media reports say other Latin American countries were also affected. Colombia's Information and Telecommunications Minister Mauricio Liscano says IFX is to be held responsible for failures in security protocols. He accuses the company of refusing to reply to requests for information. The Colombian government is looking into a civil lawsuit and possibly criminal action against the company. Colombian President Gustavo Petro says IFX Networks did not have cybersecurity measures in place. In a statement, IFX apologizes for the attack that also affected a Panamanian media house and a government site in Chile. It says its workers had managed to limit the damage. Kimi Oria from Matarang Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Atlanta Police Officer Rayon O'Brien and Atlanta Fire Rescue Department Captain Terrence Simon are being hailed as courageous saviors after they rescued a man from a flooded car due to a torrential downpour and flash flooding that swamped downtown Atlanta. Officer O'Brien came across the alarming scene where he noticed a partially submerged vehicle with Captain Simon attempting to rescue the trapped driver. Using Officer O'Brien's baton, he shattered the car window, creating an escape route for the stranded motorist. Together, the police officer and fire captain managed to safely remove the driver from the perilous situation. Mayor Andre Dickens, meanwhile, said that he has asked the city's watershed management department to evaluate Atlanta's sewer grid after the flood overwhelmed downtown Atlanta and its surrounding areas.
In the latest string of extreme weather events to strike the country, a tornado in eastern China killed 10 people and seriously injured several others. Footages on social media show high winds whipping debris above residential buildings, as well as a street strewn with fallen signs and other objects. According to reports, more than 5,500 people were affected by the tornado, 137 houses collapsed, and more than 400 people have been temporarily relocated because of the twister. China saw record-breaking downpours and weeks of historic heat this summer, with scientists saying such extreme weather events are being exacerbated by climate change. Villages in Jiangsu were leveled and at least 98 people were killed in 2016 after the region was hit by a storm with hurricane force winds and the worst tornado in half a century.
Like a story straight from the Jungle Book, a stray black bear has visited Disney World in Orlando, forcing the management to close multiple park rides. Authorities spotted the Earth sign fellow hanging in a tree near the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in Frontierland, causing quite a hullabaloo. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commissioner FWC, as well as law enforcement, arrived on the scene. This followed the bear's captivity inside the Magic Kingdom several hours later. According to FWC, the animal was just searching for the bare necessities ahead of its approaching hibernation cycle. Meanwhile, park management reopened its rides by 3 p.m. except for the Walt Disney World Railroad.
Australians rallied around the country to fight for a landmark Indigenous rights reform set to be voted for before the October 14 referendum. Tens of thousands joined Walk for Yes events in major cities ahead of the vote that could grant Indigenous Australians a constitutionally enshrined right to be consulted on policies that affect them in the long run. More than 200 years since British colonization, Indigenous people have statistically lived shorter lives than the average Australian, had access to fewer educational and professional opportunities, and were more likely to die in police custody. In Melbourne, more than 10,000 supporters marched through the streets, some with banners reading, "Your vote can vote yes." Thousands more gathered in Canberra, Perth, Brisbane, Darwin, Hobart, and Alice Springs. Recent surveys show about 60% against the reform versus 40% in support, a near reversal of the situation a year ago.
UN aid for civilians enters the rebel-held northwest Syria from Turkey via the Bab al-Hawa border crossing. It is the first such convoy since the Security Council mechanism expired in July. Jay Suarez reports.
The aid convoy consists of 17 trucks loaded with various relief materials from the United Nations. Reports say trucks pass through the crossing bearing signs with the logo of the World Food Program and the Food Agriculture Organization. Under a 2014 deal, aid for millions of residents of Syria's last remaining rebel strongholds in the country's north and northwest had largely passed through the Bab al-Hawa crossing. This without the authorization of Damascus. In July, however, the Security Council failed to reach consensus on extending the mechanism. The UN said A subsequent Syrian offer to keep the crossing open for another 6 months contained unacceptable conditions. Last month, the UN announced it would resume the aid deliveries after reaching an agreement with Damascus for a 6-month period. This in a deal that raised concerns among relief groups who wanted Syrian authorities kept out of the process. The UN Humanitarian Agency, OCHA, said Tuesday's convoy delivered 50 tons of assistance. OCHA says it included hygiene kits and educational items for some 46,000 people, nutrition support for 10,000 babies, tents and non-food items for 5,000 people, and enough supplies for 260,000 medical procedures. Jay Suarez for Matanang Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Meanwhile, in Colombia, the government and a dissident faction of the FARC guerrilla group announced a ceasefire and peace talks starting October 8. Irvin Arquiza has more details.
Months after meetings for the talks, the Colombian government and the rebel group that calls itself the Central General Staff, or EMC, announced they would hold official negotiations in Tibú, near the Venezuelan border. Local media say the parties agreed on 10 months of ceasefire and talks. At the initiative of Colombia's first ever leftist president, Gustavo Petro, the government wants to give the EMC a second chance to lay down arms. This, after rejecting a 2016 peace agreement with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, of which they were then a part. The 2016 agreement saw about 7,000 members of the FARC give up arms and attempt to reintegrate into civilian life. EMC, a faction of the group, however, decided to keep fighting under guerrilla leader Ivan Mordisco. EMC steadily increased its presence in territories formerly occupied by the FARC and largely abandoned by government forces. Irvin Arquiza for Matanang Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Large numbers of elephants from Zimbabwe's biggest national park are moving to neighboring Botswana. They are in desperate search for water. Mark Castillo tells us more.
Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority spokesman Tinashe Farawo says scores of animals have and are moving from Hwange National Park into Botswana. Hwange National Park covers an area of more than 14,600 square kilometers or 5,600 square miles. It is home to about 50,000 elephants. Since the elephants' migration in August, Farawo says he cannot quantify how many have moved. Farawo says water bodies have dried up and the animals are in search of water and food. Aside from elephants, he says that buffaloes and all types of other animals in the park are also migrating in large numbers. He blames the drought for the unfortunate event. Wildlife migration between Hwange National Park to Botswana is not uncommon. This year, however, it came too early. Farawo cites climate change as the culprit. The mass movement of wild animals is feared to lead to an increase in conflict between humans and wildlife as they pass through populated areas in Zimbabwe. Farawo warns that more animals are going to invade communities, people competing for water with animals. Conflicts between humans and wildlife is a significant problem in remote parts of Zimbabwe, caused in part by population growth. Mark Castillo from Matanang Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Satellite data shows the Antarctic sea ice levels have reached a historic low. Scientists reveal that this decrease presents detrimental consequences to the environment. Sea ice levels surrounding Antarctica has staggered to historic lows, prompting concerns for scientists to further study its cause and the environmental effects that it will imply. Walter Mayer, a senior research scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, or NSIDC, states that it's so far outside anything we've seen, it's almost mind-blowing. The Antarctic sea ice plays a huge role in regulating the planet's temperature by reflecting the sun's energy on its white surface back to the atmosphere, while also cooling down the water beneath it. This year, the sea ice levels have reached at least twice of its record lows, which is 1.5 million square meters less for the September average. Polar experts warn that the disruption of Antarctic's role as Earth's refrigerator may cause irreversible damage due to ongoing problems of global warming and climate change. Coming right up, what's new for Apple's iOS 17 update? Soccer fans worldwide are tuned in to catch the UEFA Champions League. And find out who leads the nominations for this year's Latin Grammys. Catch more news in business, tech, sports, and entertainment when we return.
Best Public Affairs Program. And the star goes to Open for Business Net 25.
It is a signal to the world that we are open for business.
Open for Business with Cesar Vallejos. Every Sunday, 9 p.m.
Nanonood ba kayo ng Art Academy? Kung hindi pa, bakit? We have so many topics to share with you at may mga special guests pa. Let's Create to Express every Saturday 10:30 a.m. dito lang sa Net 25.
Elon Musk has suggested the idea of charging all users of X, formerly known as Twitter, to pay for access to the social media platform. Billionaire tech mogul Elon Musk is considering to have a subscription-based system on the social media platform X during his conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He claimed the small monthly payment for all users is the only way to counter the platform's problem with bots. He also added that one of his actions to remove bots and fake accounts is to charge users to have a verified account. The company took the solution, in which Musk has made users pay for an enhanced service, X Premium. Meanwhile, the X Premium is available for $8 or €6.50 per month in the United States, while prices from other countries may differ depending on its location. Paid subscribers can use more features, such as longer posts and more exposure, to increase their account visibility among the other users on the platform X. Musk is also thinking of other way cheaper options, as the platform may lose a charge or a large number of users when they implement the subscription-based monthly payment. For iPhone users, today is the day when they can update the Apple's latest operating system, iOS 17, and unlock new features. Catherine Ortula has the data.
iPhone users can update to iOS 17 starting today and enjoy a slate of new features. One major update is simply saying Siri to activate Apple's voice assistant instead of Hey Siri. One hot feature is the live voicemail, which transcribes a caller's message in real time, giving iPhone users the decision whether to ignore the call or to take it. iOS 17 also introduced the standby mode, a full-screen experience designed for simply glancing information on your phone. You can view the time or photos from a distance when the iPhone is on its side and charging. The new name drop feature in iOS 17 is another cool and convenient feature. Users can now exchange contact information with a new friend by simply bringing their iPhones close to each other as they would when airdropping something. Autocorrections have been significantly improved, with the new iOS keyboard now learning your spelling habits over time and either fixing misspells or learning your personalized words. Interactive widgets, sticker creations, and updated Apple Content apps, enhanced dictation, and a lot more. The iOS 17 offers high-level changes and fun overhauls for the Apple user. Catherine Ortula for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
In the UEFA Champions League opening, Manchester City began their trophy defense with a 3-1 victory over Red Star Belgrade. Red Star initially took the lead on the brink of halftime when Osman Bukarari's goal was awarded following a VAR check for offside. Alvarez, meanwhile, had Man City on level terms just 73 seconds into the second period before his free kick on the hour that completed the turnaround, with Rodrigo making the game safe with a cultured finish in the 73rd minute. Alvarez, a World Cup winner with Argentina, impressed during the treble-winning campaign, but was used primarily as an impact sub. However, he has emerged as a key player so far this season with 8 goal contributions. Meanwhile, Lazio goalkeeper Ivan Provedel came forward and headed in a stoppage time equalizer to earn the Roman club a 1-1 draw with Atletico Madrid. Marking his Champions League debut, Provedel showed off his unlikely attacking skills by meeting a cross from Luis Alberto with a glancing header on the final play of the match. It was a measure of revenge for Provedel, who was left fuming after Pablo Barrios scored for Atletico in the first half. Provedel's goal was the 6th by a goalkeeper in the Champions League and only the 2nd from open play after Sinan Bolat scored for Standard Liège against AZ Alkmaar in 2009. The king of pop, Michael Jackson's black fedora, is set for auction in Paris, France. The iconic headwear was initially used when the pop icon first showed off his moonwalk on stage in a 1983 Motown show. The hat could go for up to 80,000 euros or $107,000 on September 26. Adam Kelly, the man who grabbed the legendary hat, kept it for years before selling it to other collectors. The said item is the main attraction of a rock memorabilia sale at the Hotel Drouot by the Art Pages Gallery. Jackson's items have lost value in recent years due to child abuse claims against him, which he denied until he died in 2009.
C'est une pièce très importante de l'histoire de la musique qui, on pourrait dire, symbolise l'émancipation définitive de Michael Jackson avec The Jackson 5. C'est aussi la première fois que Michael Jackson a fait le moonwalk avec ce fedora. Donc pièce très importante de l'histoire de la musique, le numéro 1, quoi.
The 2023 Latin Grammys nominations just dropped, and Mexican hitmaker Edgar Barrera is hands down leading the nominations. Stephanie Mayo has the scoop.
The Latin Recording Academy has announced Tuesday morning via live stream the nominations for the 24th Latin Grammy Awards. Mexican-American songwriter and producer Edgar Barrera bagged the most nominations overall with 13 nods, followed by 7 nominations each for Colombian singers Camilo, Karol G, and Shakira. Barrera, who has won a total of 20 Latin Grammy Awards and 1 Grammy Award, including Producer of the Year in 2021 was also at the epicenter of the 13th, 14th, 16th, and 22nd Latin Grammys, making him the biggest name in Latin music. This year, some of the categories Barrera is nominated for are Best Pop Song, Record of the Year, Tropical Song, Album of the Year, and Best Regional Mexican Song. Meanwhile, both Shakira and Karol G are nominated together for their TQG in categories like Song of the Year, Best Urban or Fusion Performance, and Best Urban Song. Laura Pausini will be honored as the Latin Recording Academy Person of the Year. The award-giving body also introduced 3 new categories: Best Songwriter of the Year, Best Singer-Songwriter Song, and Best Portuguese Language Urban Performance. The Latin Grammys will take place on November 16th at the FIBES Conference and Exhibition Center in Seville, Spain. Stephanie Mayo for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
Beth Matthews changes the face of fashion as she made her debut as a model with Down syndrome who walked at the London Fashion Week. Changing the world of fashion is the advocacy of the 23-year-old Wales model Beth Matthews, who was born with Down syndrome. In her career, which spans less than 2 years, she has already made appearances in famous fashion magazines like Vogue and Cosmopolitan Bulgaria. She was also given the opportunity to grace the prestigious red carpet at the Venice Film Festival. The newest addition to her achievements is her debut at this year's London Fashion Week for the Swansea-based Goose Island collection. This makes her one of the very few with the condition who are chosen to walk at the international event. Beth's mother, Fiona Matthews, shares that her daughter's growing confidence has helped her establish her identity, and it makes her proud to see Beth thrive and be an inspiration to many. The London Fashion Week, similar to those done in New York, Paris, and Milan, is one of the world's biggest events where the models hired are often criticized for their idealistic beauty standards. I'm just so glad for her.
Yeah, she looks absolutely incredible in those photos.
I saw that bit. She did. And to send you off today, here's a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., American minister and activist. Our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change.
Well, staying awake is something I struggle with because I love my sleep. But I think he means figuratively as well, just staying alert on how we can better ourselves. We actually talked about this yesterday, not being complacent and reaching your full potential.
And we always have to be open to change because change is constantly happening. There is no avoiding it. So you just have to be open to it.
There we go. And that's a wrap for tonight's news. Catch the latest updates on our social media channels. I am Gianna Llanes.
I am Nina Richie Alago Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point. Watching Mata ng Agila International. To receive more trusted, connected, and on-point news, follow, like, and subscribe to @Net25 TV.